Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt. You've reached Venus Unplugged. And what we do here is explore all aspects of the world and the archetype of Venus. And Venus represents not only our sense of beauty or what we appreciate or value as beauty, but it also represents relationship values, our aesthetics, what we consider personally worthwhile. So it allows us it's an inner compass. And Venus, that inner compass or archetype, will give us what we personally value in order for us to become whole, who we are. So often in the culture that we live in, it's obviously big business to tell the feminine in men and in women what they should look like, what they should be, and what Venus is really like. But that's all other people's ideas. What's Venus about for you? And her sidekick, or Eros, which is the god of the principle of relatedness. So what we've been exploring, as is my wont, is the myth of Persephone. Now, Persephone is the child who's abducted into the underworld, and her whole relationship and dynamic with Hades, the god of the underworld, and Demeter, her mother, we're going to explore today and begin to understand what is... Now, all of these figures are figures within ourselves. So we are always at one level or another in some archetypal seizure or state. And fairy tales and myths are ways of teaching these dynamics that sometimes we just don't have a word for it, or we just can't understand it, but we know we're in the presence of it. When it's like, what does this mean? Or is this good or is this bad? Which kind of reduces everything to its opposite. And what we are trying to do, particularly in terms of beauty and relationships and the world, is allowing the opposites to coexist, to be paradoxical, to not choose one over the other. And we are, in our culture right now, we are hearing a lot of this is right and this is wrong, instead of, wait a second, what is the paradox? What is this world of our making? What's going on here? So Demeter, Persephone, when she comes up from the underworld, her name changes to Persephone. But when she's abducted into the underworld, she goes down into the underworld as Kore, Kore. So after Kore's abduction, the myth follows Demeter in her journey and her search for the lost child. So that would be the mother principle. Now, Demeter, Lucia, is the gentle and loving mother. She's not the dark mother yet, although she does have her attitudes. And she and Demeter, on one level, are one and the same, because this is also the story of Virgin Mother and Crone, the triple goddess within and without. So her search for her lost child. And the stage is Demeter's quest for that lost child. So her quest is and gives us a pattern for responding to the divine's child entrapment in the underworld. So that's your divine child, too. Aspects of ourselves that are caught in the collective unconscious, caught in the underworld. We can kind of feel that they're there, or we forget that they're there, and we become our own abusers. So when we start to work with mythology and fairy tale, we're actually calling up these forces. They're always in our life, more active in some people's lives than others, but we all have a divine child. We all have a mother, whether we know it or not. So this is the loving mother that goes in search and wants to get her divine child from the underworld, from the collective unconscious, and also from, ruling from the unconscious, because then we really are clueless. Shit just happens, instead of that we are on a participation of our own growth and evolution, which is more responsibility, but it's also more power. It's more authenticity. So before Cause abduction, Demeter she's portrayed, she's enormous. She's a goddess, you have to remember. I mean, she's just bigger than big. She's beyond super heroine, okay? And she's portrayed as gentle and nurturing soul. Demeter is the principle that makes everything grow and everything is lush. And she's the goddess of the grain and food and nourishment. And so that's her job here upon the earth, is to make things grow. And she is, before the abduction, she's rarely harsh to human beings. She's very loving, kind of the mother, the cornucopia. And she's only punitive only when, really particularly evoked. She's not a punishing mother principle. And a lot of times, which is also interesting, is when there is a punitive quality that comes up in her, very often, particularly women, are going to have, the punishments will involve food. So there can be anorexia and bulimia when that divine child is caught in the underworld and can't be related to. So these principles, these archetype forces, are the active ingredient in our unconscious and in the collective unconscious, and that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is becoming aware of what we don't know. Whatever we don't know about ourselves will return as fate. Now, sometimes that can be a wonderful gift that we have, and we didn't know that we have it, and one day we go, I'm going to try to, let me just explore this, and suddenly you realize you have a real feel for it. And that's the positive side of the creation, okay? So when she is in her loving and nurturing and growing, think spring and summer and lush, that's all her cornucopia of life, right? She is Demeter Lucia, the nurturing one. Demeter is also innocent and then betrayed, mirroring Core's experience. See, Demeter, Persephone's or Core's father, is Zeus, Demeter's sister. Of course, in the archetypal world, they can do this stuff. This is not to be tried at home, okay? So Demeter, she's innocent, and she mirrors Core's experience. And Demeter, too, is her brother's victim. Okay, now Hades, the god of the underworld, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon are all brothers. They were born from the Titans. They overthrew the Titans, and now this is the archetypal world, all right? So there is this betrayal for Demeter also, because she's perfectly happy with her daughter, not paying too much attention to Zeus, who, Zeus, he's Jupiter, and he really can be very, very generous, but he's also a bit of a cad. He's always running around and being unfaithful, and he seems to upset. His wife is Hera, and she's constantly blaming other women in the world for his paramours and his indiscretions. So he starts a lot of trouble. He heals a lot of trouble. And so we're caught in this family, what is familiar. Words are so important, and when we start to really understand the root meaning of words, like with the well, it happened again. I don't know what this disconnect is, but I am going to continue because this is way too exciting. Okay, so she's in this. She's innocent. She's the innocent mother, just raising her daughter in this idyllic way, and there, of course, there are aspects of one another, right? Now, when Core disappears, Demeter, of course, freaks out, and she's searching frantically, and she's calling constantly, and she, without eating and drinking and resting for 9 days. Now, we've listened to this broadcast enough to know that when those numbers come up, that is a huge hint or instruction. 9 is the number of completion. 9 is the number of the triple goddess. So when numbers appear in mythology or fairy tale, it's a very specific meaning, very often referring the task. So she's running around the earth, okay, and she's in absolute despair because her daughter has been kidnapped, and she cannot imagine. I mean, who kidnaps a goddess's daughter? You got to be out of your mind. Well, it wasn't humanity, that's for sure. So she's dressed up in this deep mourning and appears old, not young and beautiful, as she was before the abduction. I think everyone can relate to that when something has been taken from us, especially something so precious. An aspect of herself, the divine child, is taken from us. We're not ready to go to the party, that's for sure, all right? And so she's suffering, and she's going around the earth in this deep mourning, and is tired and appears old and suffering. And on the 10th day, Demeter goes to Eleusis and is disguised, and that's an area in Greece, the fields, and that's where the great mystery teachings. Now, the story of Demeter and Core are the initiation rites that are given every year, both for men and women, this journey into the underworld. So she's on the 10th day. She goes there, and she's disguised, and she enters into the life of a mortal family. So they don't realize she's a goddess, because goddesses can shapeshift, and particularly in our lives. When you're struggling with something, if you can stop for a moment and see, what archetype is activated or has been provoked? Or even more important, what myth or fairy tale are we unconsciously living out? And then we can start to get the bones and start to understand, damn, this thing happens again and again. But then it has great meaning. So we were not at the suffering. We're kind of in the thick of the mythological world, which is very real and affects us, humanity, deeply. So they offer her human comforts for loss and grief, and humor, and useful work, and companionship, and understanding. And what she does, because she is a goddess, is there is a child, and she tries to immortalize this child, this infant son of the house. But she fails, because the mother comes in and wrecks everything. So when we're missing something, when something has been taken, which is an aspect of ourselves, right? We will try to rekindle it, but we can't, you see. She's a goddess, and, humans are terrified, and rightfully so, of these archetypal forces. They forget we're human. We can get burned up. We can, it's a great task to be able to work with these, and the necessary etiquette and respect that we need. How do we address a god or a goddess? And she is the only god or goddess in the Greek pantheon to undergo mourning and loss as mortals do. And in her experience, she bridges the separate worlds of the human and the divine. So that's an important image. The divine child is abducted, her child core, which means maiden, is abducted into the underworld, and she, as mother, mourns. Usually, the gods and goddesses, they don't get that personally involved in they affect our world, but they don't get personally involved in the way of the world. But she does. So the psychological meaning of this, the first stages of Demeter's quest, is reunion with the divine child core. And the myth gives us a sense of kind of this movement through the experience of loss and betrayal. So that's one of its teachings. Yes, there is the necessary loss. Yes, there is the abduction, or what we would see as post-traumatic stress. A part of us is wounded, particularly the parts in childhood, and it goes into the underworld. It goes into the collective unconscious. And it affects us for the rest of our lives. But if we go on the journey to restore and connect to this divine child, who's innocent, by the way, completely and utterly innocent, it begins with mourning, and even the goddess mourns. So this movement, this experience, how does one move through the realm of loss and betrayal? Now, on a deep psychological level, any betrayal is always an upgrade in consciousness. I know, it doesn't sound fair. But it's not fair because it's not human. It's an upgrade in consciousness because through a loss and through a betrayal, we've got to grow. It's always a call to grow. Or we're just going to be writhing around for the rest of our life in some bitter experience that had to happen anyway. The gods arranged it. When we say it's not fair, how could this happen? Believe me, there's some archetypal divinity initiating you into growing. That's the ticket. Growing into who we are, to the potential of our soul and of our being. So her initial helplessness, and she's devastated and she's lonely, as we must be. When there is a loss, we're helpless and we're devastated and we're lonely, and the search must be experienced. We're not going to sit home and go on Facebook for our search. We need to search in forbidden places, unknown places, or call for the help of strength within ourselves, or strength around the world, or strength above. Most people call on the divine when they need help, which is a good idea. So her loss of core and their shared betrayal and the acknowledgement of those 9 days of total immersion into wandering grief. Wandering grief, you're staggering, and you're also wandering within your own being, and you're thinking, I don't have the strength for this, and you keep on kind of coming up against your own inferiority, or not knowing, or innocence, or uselessness, or having a clue. the hell am I doing here? Same thing kind of happens when you're going to create something. We start in this kind of stage of, we get excited, but there's also this drop into the unknown, because we're going to have to come up against borders that we never knew were there to bring the birth of the new image. So she's completely in this feeling, and she's very much alone in this feeling. But she's not consumed forever. So there's a hint right there, too. So the both facets of Demeter's intense loss and longing need to be experienced, and the immersion in the feeling and the reaching out. The feeling and the reaching out. And sometimes we reach out to heaven, sometimes we reach out to auspicious strangers, sometimes we reach out, there's all sorts of ways that we reach out longing, please help me, give me a hint. And she reaches out, and she's then accepted into this human household. And she's given a useful place, and she offers service, and she's accepted, and eventually humor reaches her. Humor, laughter, is the one truly authentic human gift. It's a very powerful healing gift. That deep laughter at the heart of things in life. When we finally get the punchline and we laugh, it's turned into wisdom. Bitterness turned into wisdom. Now, when she begins to take nourishment, then she starts to awake to her anger. And these are all necessary aspects of her quest and the Demeter within us, the loving mother, the nurturing one. And they represent actual acts that one part of the self, that's with self with a capital S, must undertake in order to find the abducted divine child, which is another part of the self, the lost potential trapped in the underworld. So often I see the suffering, because in our humanness we don't realize that we need to become the loving mother to that wounded divine child. And we reject it. We don't realize it. We want somebody else to come along and take care of it. It happens a lot in relationships where they want the man to be the loving mother. He doesn't know what we're talking about. He can't do that. He's got his own boo-boo going on. So to turn in the middle of our grief and longing, that's the call to search for the divine child. The innocent one, the part of us we didn't do anything. Now, most of the time, being humans, we want to avoid this. We really want to avoid the full-bodied response of pain and longing for lost innocence. And denial of the betrayal itself is very, very common. And one of the ways we deny it is we blame the other. And I'm saying, shit happens and it's something that, we're completely innocent. But no matter what happens to us or has happened to us, we're responsible for getting that divine child out of the prison of the underworld. No one's going to come along and save, and if they do, they're going to save in their way, and it's another form of abduction. So we need to see, and it starts a lot of times, people will do it in some type of therapy or some type of understanding or language, like astrology or the esoteric sciences or myth or psychology. Psyche's logic. What the hell is going on here? That's what gives meaning. It's never a direct answer. So this fear, it's not unreasonable to have this great terror. And it's very possible that we can become stuck at the loss and at the experience and at the anorexic response of refusing nourishment, both literally and in terms of food, and metaphorically in terms of joy and connection. We get depressed. I'm depressed. I'm enraged. I am going to just not take in nourishment, and then you'll see everyone will suffer. Well, not really. Because it's our job to start to understand this. So the first stage of our journey reflects the descent into the underworld of primal loss. Some of us never get over the primal loss. And we're going to spend our life wandering. Because that's the only thing we know. But it's not the only thing that is there. So the wandering is important. But so when we were identified with the victim, it can continue wandering ceaselessly and calling for that which is lost, but never reaching out for the connection that's available in the here and the now. In this state, a person may become saturated or just plain devastated, not just with their own helpless grief, but with the grief of the world as well. This is a very important statement. The grief of the world. Many, many people are wandering and in a deep state of grief these days. Where is the divine child? Where is the Savior? What is going to help us? We're around and around. We're being victimized by some type of bully or something greater than we are, and we don't know what attitude to take. Well, I suggest you go in search of your own divine child, because while all this stuff is happening, you still have to get that divine child, which will such a great sense of reality. So with a deep level of archetypal mourning, you can turn, that individual, or what is called individuation, into kind of like a psychic sponge, and you can be soaking up the suffering displayed on every street and in every newspaper. So we see all this grief, and in our world, so we're wandering around looking for the beloved, that innocent part of us. Now, the wound, the archetypal wound that everyone carries, everyone gets wounded, that's the wounded healer on one level or another. But when we realize this is the time that in the morning for past losses and injuries, and sometimes we refuse to eat and we withdraw from the world. Now, that's an important stage, but we don't want to stay in that kind of hungry mouth stage, because we're starving ourselves off, and we're starving ourselves off from nurturing, and we're constantly in, what's going on in the world. We're starving ourselves off from joy. Yes, we need to be informed, but we don't have to suck all this stuff in. So we will continue to look at this journey of Demeter and the lost innocence and the unfixable nature of past betrayals and the grief that naturally flows from the betrayals. We must consciously accept, not just unconsciously endure. And I think this is very important, particularly at this point in history, that we begin to know the suffering because it's been triggered globally, and then we are going to take that grief and we're going to accept it and not just endure it. We can do something about this. we can get that child up from the underworld. So here's to consciously awakening to the grief and the wound of that divine child and the great adventure and discovery of who you are and strengths you didn't know that you had. Okay, till next week. Bye-bye.